So, hi, everybody. A couple of weeks ago, Perry and I were talking about alumni participation, and she said, I know the person who knows everything about everything, and including donor participation. So, she set up this conversation today. Welcome, Perry. Welcome, Shalonda. It's such an honor to be here with you. I'd love it if you could, before we dive into the conversation, you could introduce yourselves and maybe just say one or two sentences about what alumni participation has meant to you in your career.
Very
Shalonda?
Okay, well, I'll go first. I'm Dr. Shalonda Martin, and I'm excited to be here in this conversation today. My background is advancement services. I don't know everything, so lower the expectations a little bit, but I have had the pleasure of working with a lot of really amazing colleagues throughout the advancement sector on these metrics specifically and trying to grow them and thinking about them strategically. And I think there's a lot of joy that they are shifting to allow us to approach them in a more meaningful way for our institutions. So excited to have this conversation, and I'll pass it over to Perry.
Thanks. So I'm Perry. I'm now the founder and principal of Rad Philanthropy, but over the last 15 years, I've been working on all things alumni engagement and alumni participation, mostly at kind of fun and funky niche liberal arts colleges. So, your Harvey Mudds, your Scripps, those sorts of fun places. And I mean, participation has really been the bread and butter of my work during that time, whether it was an annual giving, really chasing that metric, but also in terms of how I've approached the work with this lens of inclusivity of how do we get people to engage in this community and really make it work for everyone. So that's a little bit where I come from, thinking about the participation game, as it were.
Awesome. So, thanks so much to both of you for joining. For the rest of folks who are listening in, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I asked you a question right there. If you'd like to just share what organization you're with, maybe your title, something like that, just to know who's here with us. This conversation is part of Office Hours. That's a program that we do in Donor Participation Project almost every week. But we've been lucky to have some pretty brilliant people join us. So check that out. I'll put a link there at the end. For us to get started, maybe imagine there's somebody who is not already obsessed with this topic, or maybe is not in higher ed. What's the big deal with alumni participation and this news that the U.S. News ranking dropped it as a factor? Any or both of you, feel free to pitch in.
Yeah, so it's been something that everyone has been chasing, as Perry said, for a really long time. And it contributes to the overall ranking, not significantly, I wouldn't say, but marketed as such internally for sure within institutions. And the shift away from that being a part of the ranking is significant because it allows us to really think about what does success look like answering that question in a different way. Because if you're looking at metrics, it's like to say metrics should serve a purpose beyond just existing for the sake of existing. And if you're just chasing that metric as opposed to using the metric to your benefit, it's not the best way of going about it. So we have in a long time been in a place where the metric, we were in service to the metric as opposed to the metric being in service to us. So this shift is allowing us to really think of more meaningfully about what does success look like for our institutions. And that's a little bit of what I'd say that kind of what it's been like, the background of it.
Yeah. And I would just say, in my experience, in the last 15 years in advancement shops, a lot of schools have a lot of pressure to increase alumni participation. Some shops have a lot of pressure to increase the overall dollars raised or unrestricted dollars raised. And I haven't seen a ton of shops that are resourced to really approach all of those goals. Those are all really challenging goals. They all require different strategies. And so a lot of times what you get is an office maybe focused on one or two of those, maybe muddying the water a little bit, trying to get to both of them at the same time. But it is a really interesting thing to think about, because especially when you talk with students, their parents, or even alums, rankings are something that are really important to them when they think about their college experience, their college choice, economic mobility, other factors like that. So it's something that our audience cares about quite a bit. But kind of like Shalonda said, we've been chasing it and maybe not to get to the same purpose as our audience wants us to.
Super interesting. And there's a parallel group in the Donor Participation Project that's examining a little bit of what you just mentioned, Perry, the roadblocks and the inadequate staffing. And I saw Julie Knight here, who's a part of that group, and maybe others who I missed. And in that case, I apologize. But there's just a lot. And for those who may have fallen out of, I don't know, or who have just started their career right now, alumni participation was a ranking factor. It was counted inside one of the most well-known rankings, the U.S. News World and what report? I forget. I'm sure one of you knows. But anyhow, the U.S. News ranking. And it was counted. The thing was, it was a very small percentage of that score, right? There's, what was it? 5%? 3%?
5% and 3% in recent years.
Yes. So Shalonda mentioned that a lot of it was messaging, right? That we've messaged that to our constituents. What do you think is going to change from the external part? So Shalonda was talking about we need to rethink the strategy. But what do you think is going to change from the messaging? Are we just going to stop talking about alumni participation? What are your thoughts?
Well, I can tell you when I was first trained as a phonathon caller in 2005, this was one of the talking points I was trained on, and it kind of never went away. It'd been around before that. I'm frankly not sure for how long, and it's really continued. I've seen it throughout my career as something that is really tangible. And like I said earlier, something that actually really resonates with a lot of our audience. It's very tangible, and it seems like, the reputation of their degree, it matters to them. They know it makes an impact on them. So even if it is transactional for them, it's something a lot of people can at least invest a couple bucks in because, they think it's going to make an impact on their day-to-day. In terms of the messaging, I would say there has been an upside to alumni participation being a goal when it comes to messaging, which is that it's really put us in a lot of schools in a position to be really inclusive about our fundraising, to really try to get everyone to the table to give at whatever amount is meaningful to them. I think that's important and something that we should still aspire to really have our donors represent our entire community, to have everyone have the seat at the table and know that gifts of any size make a difference. I still believe that as an annual giving professional. That being said, a lot of the messaging has gone to a really transactional place. And I think some of it might change. Like, there could be a large impact on, say, for example, days of giving have become a huge trend. But something like a day of giving also has this benefit of being a reputational event in a different way, maybe than alumni participation, in terms of showing that this is a big community. There is backing. There's a network here. So there's other effects that maybe have popped up along the way that can replace the participation rate in terms of its impact. But we'll see. What do you guys think about how messaging will change?
Yeah, you made me laugh when you mentioned the piece about being a student caller, because I'm remembering that was something that they told me when I was a student caller as well. And I remember thinking oh, wow, this is really significant. This is a big deal. But when we think about some of the shifts that we've seen, even before this change happened with U.S. News and World Report, I do think I've seen, especially externally facing, a shift in the messaging, focusing more on impact and looking more at donor behavior and what that means. And as we're understanding what people's motivations are, we're trying to speak more to that. And what we've found in recent years is that motivation has tied a lot more to people's belief on impact, their trust in your institution, and how can we message those things out to really increase it? Because I don't think just because U.S. News and World Report aren't considering this in the ranking that it's going to go away as a metric within our institution. It's just the way that we're addressing it. Because I think, I'm hoping that people won't try to game it as much, and they'll try to use it in a way, once again, where it's beneficial to them and really contributes more to their overall strategy to build a culture of philanthropy, speaking more to retention as opposed to just trying to get whatever they can, every single year, but going about it in a more strategic way. But I do think that messaging has already shifted previously with more of a focus on impact and how we can communicate this is what your gift does. And you see a lot of that with, the crowdfunding campaigns, and really bringing in, students and other people to speak to like, oh, this is what happened. We encourage you to give to this cause. So hopefully we see more things trending that way as opposed to saying like, oh, the reason that you should give is because of the ranking.
Oh my goodness. Advancement professionals gaming a metric? I've never heard of that.
Never.
Hey, we're a competitive bunch. Steve has a really good question here. Steve is also an active member of the DPP. Welcome and thanks. He is. Well, I'm going to read his comment. A number of schools are sharing that U.S. News and World Report rankings no longer matter. Well, I don't think that that's exactly what they're saying. They're saying they're dropping out from submitting in the ranking. Is this part of them? Is this part of them as in U.S. News changing? Do you see a relationship between these issues?
I would say U.S. News and World Report has kind of been one of the most important rankings with colleges, but they have continually been challenged to stay relevant, in part because of a number of issues. So, for example, we know that it's not really a level playing field with these rankings, but there's also like a subjective moral judgment essentially that we're all buying into if we use their rankings because of the criteria they have determined makes a school good or great. And I think especially with what's been happening in the law school area, there's been a greater call to look away just from salary as a way to show performance, but towards social impact as well. So I think it's related to broader calls for social justice and impact in our sector, not just metrics for metrics' sake as a way of showing that we're the best.
Yeah. Sorry, Shalonda, please go ahead.
No, it's been used, it's a decision support tool for students largely.
Mm-hmm.
And as they're looking at that and deciding where to go, they're realizing, and as Perry was saying, and trying to stay relevant, they have to take that back to what actually matters to students and to parents when they're having those discussions and navigating what school to select. And it's not the same things as it used to be. And I do think that some of it has been the schools that I'm saying, like, this doesn't matter. This is, we're dropping out of this. People are hearing those conversations and asking like, well, when I'm making my decision, is this where I'm going to look at? Are they actually giving me the data that's going to help me in making my decision? Or are they dated? Are they not really bringing in things that are meaningful to me because they're not measuring them or they're not asking those questions? So while I don't have evidence to say, oh, yes, absolutely, here's a memo where it proves it, I do believe that there's definitely a connection between the two.
Thanks so much. I see a couple of trends that are related to this too, which is one, the kind of immense inequality that exists among institutions. So what I saw, the ones that were dropping out were the Harvards and, the Harvard Medical School of the world. And then an increased competitiveness kind of among the everybody else group. I don't know if we will ever have a correct answer. But
it could also be a reflection of, I'm sure some of the people on this call have heard about the admissions cliff that we're now entering. As incoming freshman or first year classes are going to be getting smaller and smaller, just having to deal with population growth in American society. So there's questions on the enrollment side that are really shifting this equation.
Exactly. It's multifaceted for sure. Michelle has a great question that maybe takes us a little bit out of the specific metric, but is more of like the strategic piece. She says, every year you have more alumni that are graduating. So aren't you just spinning your wheels when trying to increase your alumni giving rate? Oh boy.
Yeah. I worked at colleges founded in the 50s and 60s that had much smaller class sizes in their first few decades as compared to today. So absolutely. not only is the work itself hard to increase alumni participation, things like this are almost literally impossible to overcome
We're not
unless
resourcing proportionally, right?
or gaming the system. You know, some institutions have made broad swaths of their alumni base inactive. You know, there's lots of tricks that some schools have taken on to try to get around this. And that's really what it is. It's a trick. You're not actually able to make a meaningful impact when the numbers are stacked this way.
Shalonda, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I would agree. There's definitely, as much as people are working to increase participation, there's a lot of work that people have done to manage the denominator, and think about, so it's like, alumni participation, or is it, oh yeah, we're, doing denominator management. And hopefully we can get away from that, because the other thing that comes into that, when you are doing so much work to get your, spinning your wheels to get your giving rate up, you're being inequitable probably in your practices, because you're trying to wipe out broad groups of people from your denominator too. And another marker that was added is diversity. So when we're looking at that and we're thinking about the interrelation between people's experiences of alumni and how they're advocates for your institution, to then hopefully encourage other people to want to engage with your institution as students, it's all interconnected. And I think we're seeing more partnerships. So advancement no longer is existing in a bubble where it's just only alumni. We're partnering much more intensely with other people on campus, because we can see the interrelation between all of the functions that we do. And what we do doesn't just financially support what other people do, but it also reputationally does too. So if people are not being included in their alumni experience, and other people are hearing about this, and this is the narrative that's happening, that's something we need to think about too.
Wow, that was very impactful to me, because I was at a school that just erased their night school students because, again, they weren't giving at such higher rates. And until today, I never actually realized that was the more diverse group of people. We just, it was just a decision to just wipe them out. That's absolutely, if you look at it in this light, it's kind of horrible. Going back to the strategic piece, we're kind of still saying that alumni participation is still going to be important. Do we think there's going to be, is that focus, it's not going to be so much on the number anymore, but so do you think there's some, qualitatively, is that focus going to change? Are we going to look at things like loyalty, or like Shalonda mentioned, engagement? Do you have thoughts on a better path forward, essentially?
Yeah, one thing that I'm a proponent of is this idea of shifting how phonathons work. So phonathons are often a microcosm of all the work that we do in advancement, but they're almost always housed under annual giving. And so their goals are whatever the annual giving goals are. Oftentimes alumni participation, maybe unrestricted dollars, maybe other things. I think it's really critical to start thinking about how to move phonathons or engagement centers out of annual giving and have them serve broader engagement practices of the advancement division. I think donors we've heard, how many times have we heard, I only hear from you when you want my money. Donors have been saying to us for decades they want to help in other ways. And we have ignored them and not created systems to allow them to do that and actually have the greatest impact possible from them on our communities and for our students. So looking at that phonathon example, if we reposition phonathon to not just be about giving, but to be about volunteerism, to be about events, to be about mentoring, whatever it may be, we are setting ourselves up for the greatest amount of contributions we've seen from our community. And I am hopeful that that example can be replicated in broader ways as we shift our strategy and resources in advancement.
Thinking of it more from a wider engagement perspective. That makes a lot of sense. For I think this is a question for you, Shalonda. How are shops that are thinking in this way, how are they measuring this, right? I know we kind of rely on metrics a lot. How are people looking? Is that the case AAMs or what is it?
I mean, I think case AAM is definitely a great starting point and a way to think of things a lot more holistically. I know what I've found difficult about it is that what I like about it is that it includes more than just the things that advancement specifically is doing. So you're working with other campus partners to gather this data, but it also makes it difficult because now you have to work with them so that they can measure it in a way so that you can consume it, so you can then report out on it. And since this is just now kind of coming up and bubbling up, it's not all established. So getting everything set up in a way that you can then extract it and report on it is a bit of the heavy lift. But when things are called out as important, resources are put towards them, and then you can start measuring them and getting what you need. So I'm thinking there'll be a shift in making sure that there are resources and people using their, political capital in their organizations to motivate other units to think about this too in partnership with advancement.
We have a great question from Andy, but before I go into it, do you think in this path of valuing engagement more and also measuring it, do you think that means that digital engagement will become more prominent? It is easier to measure, right? That's kind of what I'm thinking. And I do know that higher ed institutions are still very traditional in the ways they think about engagement. Do you think there's some progress coming to us from there?
Yeah, I think so, especially since, in general, when we think about how people are choosing to consume information from our institutions, and the digital is, becoming more and more. It's not completely replacing other methods of communication, but I can definitely see an increase of that.
I do think there is a technical limitation, which is a lot of schools have greatly increased their tech stack in the last few years, especially after, not sure if I want to say we're after the COVID era. And how many of us have all these programs that don't talk to each other, that don't talk to our CRM? So we're just buried in even more data that we can't necessarily use in a critical way. Even just to see who's paying attention to us, who's responding. So we've made it even trickier for ourselves by that regard.
My good. I think that's a topic for another webinar, but it's a really good one. Andy had a really good question. How do you think that increased student debt has affected alumni giving participation?
I mean, I think that's a really big question, and I would zoom out on it and just think about it a little bit generationally. How have generational shifts in how higher education is accessible in the United States affected alumni giving participation? I think a lot of us have seen charts that show inflation of the cost of attendance and how much more expensive our schools have become, especially when you consider that work study and minimum wage has not increased over time. So if you work 20 hours a week in the 70s, great, you could get through school. I worked 30 hours a week as a full-time student a lot of time, and I still walked away with debt, and I had a pretty generous amount of scholarships given to me. So I think there's broader shifts in the higher education system and generationally. One of the things I think that research has shown is that against a lot of assumptions, younger generations are just as generous, if not more generous than prior generations. I think the organizations and the ways that they give are very different. And I think that we have really missed that boat. We have kept asking them to conform to us and the way we do things and the way we like to do things, instead of getting on the same page of where they're at and what moves them, what impacts them, and how they want to be our partners in supporting our communities.
Comprehensive answer to a comprehensive question. Any thoughts here, Shalonda?
Yeah, I feel like this one, it's always been something that has impacted it. I even remember as a student caller, that's why I was like, maybe I don't want to be a fundraiser. I remember getting so many people responding saying, why are you calling me? Do you know how much debt I have? I can't give. and going through the script and be like, well, maybe this will work for you. Maybe it was just something that seemed to happen a lot. So definitely a trend that has grown because it is becoming increasingly more difficult for people to afford to attend schools. And they're adding this now to the rankings as an outcome piece. You know, people want to know, when I leave your school, one of the value propositions is, how am I going to leave just with a mountain of debt? Am I going to be able to leave with a good job? Like, that's one of the pieces. So that then I think correlates into alumni giving, and we have to think about that because it's part of that experience.
And one more thought on this, like, while many of us were tasked with increasing alumni participation, while student debt has been increasing over the past few decades, how did that decrease our ability to secure larger gifts, increase the amount of endowed scholarships, and that sort of thing? Like, as we think about the strategies we've chosen or have been chosen for us, there are real economic impacts on our communities. What if instead of chasing alumni participation, we were chasing annual endowed scholarship dollars to decrease student loan debt? How would that affect our fundraising today? How would that affect our students and their lives and their educational experiences? These choices matter.
Yeah, and I'd say that recently I've seen a lot more schools focusing on scholarships and working with that in partnership with their annual giving teams as something that's kind of universally one of their pillars of things that they're doing at their institutions, and also looking at middle income, because that's significantly affected, because you make too much to get aid in some situations if it's need based, but not quite enough in other instances to cover your expenses. So thinking about how can we really make it so that everybody can have these experiences and come to school and not leave with a mountain of debt.
Boy, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. We have short-term changes. We also have the long-term impact of the decisions that we made and that we made in the past that we're now kind of paying for. And all these long-term impacts are always just harder to measure, right? And to prove in a way. We've talked about, just to recap a little bit, what the possibilities are for what we think shops should or could or may focus on. Engagement. We talked about with the complications of measuring that engagement across the entire campus enterprise. I know some schools like to use that word. We've talked about digital engagement. And I want to ask you about another piece of this, which is alumni participation has two words, and the first one is alumni. And I know lots of schools were really interested in getting gifts from non-alumni, and we're seeing growth in that area. Do you think that's going to free the annual fund team from the shackles of only being able to, and think of other types of strategies that will attract non-alumni? Have you been seeing this in the institution?
I've been asked to help with friends fundraising before, but it's the same fundamental problem. Who's engaging them? Mm-hmm. There aren't just people out there who don't have a clear affinity who are willing to give. What is the affinity? What is the program? What is the relationship that is bringing them in? And if we're now going to pivot towards that because we see an opportunity, well, fundraising isn't the answer to get those gifts in the door. We got to do something to connect with those people and have it be a two-way relationship.
Yeah, I don't see major friend campaigns overtaking the primary focus on alumni at all. I can see the addition of some of those if schools are properly resourced, but it also comes back to that because sometimes you have very small annual giving teams doing, monumentous amounts of work. And when you look at what they're doing, it's like, how could they possibly add something else to that list of responsibilities? So I think that that's the other consideration. Are they going to be resourced to do more and focus in another area? And I think some of the schools who, if they have it, especially when they're thinking about this from a pipeline mindset, because sometimes your major gifts don't necessarily come from your alumni, and it could be an opportunity to get somebody who maybe is part of your local community, and that's their affinity to engage, and then long-term build that into something else. And a lot of that does start at the annual giving level. So there could be opportunity. I don't see it happening in a very broad way across the board.
Great. Well, thank you for pouring a glass of cold water on that idea. But I'm joking. I'm joking. I just come up with these things. Tiffany has a great question. Does the panel have any thoughts about budgetary changes that will happen throughout higher ed to annual giving shops in the coming year? That I'm sure both of you have better insights than I do here.
Well, I mean, at least when it comes to this changing landscape of participation, I think the timing of that is unlikely to affect budget for next year. A lot of those decisions have probably generally already been made. I think that specifically could affect annual giving in the future. I think that this likely could affect specific parts of the budget, such as tech, professional development, the areas that kind of might hit first before broader team budget realignment. Shalonda, I know you work with those sorts of pieces as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Definitely not this year. And I think that's a good thing. So I'm happy about the timing because it could see in some instances people maybe making some knee-jerk reactions to try to like, oh, we don't need all of this anymore. And I think the thing that's important to think about when we see changes like this, yes, exciting, it gives us an opportunity to change things, but it's change, it's not elimination, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Alumni participation is still a metric, and it's still a metric of engagement too. So when we're thinking about, you know, we want to make sure that we're engaging alumni or we're participating in AAM or any of these things, we can't say that, you know, this annual giving piece no longer holds importance. It's just that we're thinking about it differently, which still means it requires resources. And in some ways, it might require more. So I hope that institutions, their leadership really thinks about what does that look like and what do we want to do? And they frame very clearly what does success look like in this piece of the work and how does it contribute and connect to the other pieces? Because if we think of it in this very siloed view of annual giving is only alumni participation, we're missing a very huge opportunity to really expand the work that our institutions do and better serve our institutions.
Thanks, Shalonda. Sean Davendorf from Tufts University recently led a small group conversation in DPP around fundraising technology. And when he polled the group, it was an annual fund kind of participation-driven group, right? But major gifts was actually, and major gift pipeline was actually kind of a trending topic. So maybe that's kind of where things are going, right? There'll be more shops that are, like Shalonda said, you know, freed from having to pursue one type of strategy and can think more creatively, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage shops, don't react and change everything right away. I love working groups. I love committees. Sorry to be that person. Get important stakeholders together and start conversations, long-term, serious conversations about how this should affect your goals, what this is going to do to how your audience interacts with you. Start talking about it now so that a year from now, you feel really solid about whether or not you keep approaching this. Does it matter to you because of broad engagement metrics? Is there a better way you think your team can use the resources to make the biggest impact on your community? Start the conversations now. These are going to be long, hard, challenging conversations that need to involve a lot of different points of view.
Next question, Georgia. Kind of going into medical fundraising, how would the panel address a medical campus that suddenly, parenthesis, wants advancement to focus on alumni-only giving? They have made an assumption that the Grateful Patient Program captures other annual donor groups. I'll let you both put on your consulting hats and take a stab at this.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I can see and understand why that directive would be given. I haven't looked at it recently, but it did look at some of this data some years back, and the return on Grateful Patient programs compared to just your standard annual giving program isn't typically as much unless like you're, especially if you're in an institution where it's, you know, university that has a medical school. So if they're looking at that, then I can see why they would say, oh, only do this part. But I think that I would look a little bit more at the pipeline and see if there's any more correlation, because I think it would be an opportunity to hopefully tell a data-driven story from your institution's point of view. So if you can find that at your institution, or more broadly speaking, to really communicate there is value and opportunity here, and especially if you can speak to that pipeline opportunity of how if people are giving through a grateful patient program, especially with the way that meaning is derived in that experience, the likelihood of them to potentially give a bigger gift or to support or be ambassadors for your institution might be what makes a difference. So maybe we shouldn't just give up on this as an experience.
Yeah, I mean, one question I have is how's your doctor's debt when they graduate, right? There's a student loan debt consideration, I think, that maybe needs to factor into a strategy change like this. The other thing I think about with something like this, and I think about this a lot in higher ed, is the exclusion of faculty and staff from giving campaigns when these are some of your most invested community members who do want their organization they work at. It's one of their top philanthropic priorities. Now, I do think staff and faculty campaigns can be incredibly problematic in nonprofits of all types, especially if people are not being paid a living wage or receiving decent benefits. I think turning around and asking the staff to give is actually one of the most heartless things you can do. But in a different sense, it can actually be one of the things that can bring your community really closer together, because here's your believers who come in and day out and feel like they've gotten just as much, if not more, back from your organization. So I think there might be opportunities there as well, depending on the culture of your institution.
We'll talk about built-in engagement, right? They're going, people are coming into work every day. You hope they're engaged.
Yeah.
Okay, so now going on to the piece that everybody was actually here for, which was, okay, out with alumni giving participation. What's the new metric? What goes in the report now? I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours. Okay, Perry. So I love loyalty. I love loyalty as measured by 3+ years of giving, and that just, you look at it every year, and it can be going up. Then you're doing well, and that's kind of indicative of pipeline. And the things that you do to increase that loyalty usually help with the overall participation also. So it's kind of like a double win. That's my goal, but open to other ideas.
No, I agree. I think that that's a really good one. And I think that that will be a shift, is looking more at retention. And because the strategies that you have to do for retention are different than when you're trying to just get somebody in the door. I think I would be interested in what it does to senior giving campaigns too. Are those going away? Because in my experience, they haven't necessarily to the most to longevity of giving and retention, and even just the amount that is. So it's part of been the gaming almost, it seems. So I think that a shift to really looking at, well, if we really want to focus on retaining people and building an actual pipeline, what does that look like, as opposed to playing with the denominator or just trying to get anybody in at any dollar amount, in some instances taking in like a couple of dollars as opposed to a more meaningful gift.
Well, going off what you're talking about, does this mean sock campaigns are going away? I know some donors really love getting the special socks every year, and that does mean something to them. I don't know. I mean, I think the thing here is that what is meaningful and relational to an individual is different between people, right? We're all different. We're all individuals. And this goes to the question of, how well do we know our people? How well are we forming relationships and finding out what's going to bring in their investment or bring in their commitment? Or going back to what we talked about earlier, not being so dang focused on just the dollars, on just the donors. People want to give in different ways, and we're not making it easy for them to do so.
So I have two stories about this. Senior class campaign, Dan Frezza and Matthew Lambert were presented when they were both at William and Mary. Dan Frezza has since moved on, but they made huge strides by starting their student philanthropy program on year one, because by the time they got to senior, they had been giving 3 or 4 years already, and then that's when the loyalty thing kicked in. So, that's kind of why I vote for that. Question from Jeremy. We'll just here. Is leaning out or away worth considering? What verdicts exist for employing giving technologies that present avenues of giving that are short and sweet? For example, the Apple Pay stands, the text to gives. I don't know if Jeremy's advocating for or against, or he's simply just asking. But do you think this is going to start maybe like a mind shift change that's going to lead us toward these things or further away from them?
For me, this is the second part of this question has to do with my whole like stop having annual giving be R&D for all of the advancement division problem, which is like if annual giving is the one that's implementing texting, well, then it's going to be focused on the annual giving goals. And texting is such a great way to engage people or communicate with them. So why are we not leveraging it for other types of relationship building? Like, I think we know these things work, but why do we always have to look at them in the scope of annual giving? Like, I firmly believe that if we are meeting people where they are and providing varied opportunities for them to get involved with us, if you build it, the money will come, right? People will fundraise or people will give. The fundraising will be there if they feel like, they're valued, they're seen, the organization is aligned with their values.
Yeah, I think that I could see more investment in these types of technology. I think there's already data that shows there's significant conversion in some of these, because when we're looking at where people's motivations are, some people are deep in it. They're like, I care about this. This is super meaningful to me. And then other people, they're like, I want to give right now. And I want to not super engage with people. I'm dipping my toe in, make it easy for me. And maybe I'll come back next time and I'll actually speak to you. So we have to think about, kind of where on the spectrum different people are with that experience and how we can best serve their needs. So I do see opportunity for that. And there's data that supports there's a good, strong conversion.
And maybe taking that idea one step further is the concept that what we do actually trains people to behave a certain way. So by now, many of us have donors who are trained to give on our giving day. And if you take that away, maybe we should have trained them differently, but we also need to acknowledge the reality that we have. So if people are in a transactional mindset, it can be tough to just like stop it cold turkey.
What happens when our giving day has more participants than our reunion or our homecoming? What does that say about what our audience wants from us or what we're providing, right? Like, I think for some people, giving is actually the easiest way to stay engaged. Like, you don't have time to go back to campus, you're far away, you're in a stage of life where they're not providing immediate value to you. Giving $25 a year, you know what? It feels nice. It's probably helping.
Stay connected.
Why not? And I think we maybe are making things overly complicated at sometimes, but that can be a reality for some donors too. But this goes to, some of what we've already talked about, like how well do we really know and understand our constituents and why they're behaving the way they are? We may have trained them to do something, but is it because of why are they doing it because of the same reason we thought they would be in the first place?
Yeah, because I think that some of the training might be they're doing it kind of when we have presented the opportunity. So there's definitely a lot of behavior around calendar year end, which is, sometimes associated with taxes. And then some people, they're not even actually hitting the point where they're actually writing off that amount. But there's something where they've been trained like, oh, this is the time of year I'm going to do this. Others, it may be associated with our giving day. But the other part of the why, as far as, well, I know when you're giving, you're giving at these like certain different points in the year, the inflections where we presented opportunities or there's, a giving season, so to speak. But tell me more about the why. So to what's your point, Perry, like why are they actually engaging? Is it because they think it's meaningful or they just want it to, is this still very transactional? I think that's a good question to explore.
Fascinating. Well, I want to invite everybody who joined today to connect with people as brilliant as our panelists today. You can connect with them on LinkedIn, Perry Radford, Dr. Shalonda Martin. You can connect with other people, including them, in the Donor Participation Project. We're going to have the recording of the session. It's going to live on LinkedIn forever, but we also make a copy and we put it in our resource library for everybody. We have all types of groups that are meeting. The one that I mentioned before, Roadblocks to Donor Participation in Higher Ed, the one about fundraising technology. Perry's leading a one on people who are interested in learning about consulting and kind of having a joint journey. So all types of interesting groups. We have a monthly speaker, so highly recommended that you join and that you connect with our panelists today. I'm going to start asking you for closing remarks. And while you're doing that, maybe if somebody has a question, we'll answer it. But we know everybody's super busy, including both of you today. So do you want to do a summary of what we talked about and kind of where you see hope and danger in our future?
Danger. Yeah, thank you, first of all, everybody, for attending and for your questions. It's a great experience to have this discussion with you all today. As far as we're moving forward, think strategically. Don't make any fast decisions as far as changing your resources or your tech stack, but really think about what is going to meet the needs of your institution, of your donor or your alumni base, and broaden that definition of success. So have those conversations about what does success look like. Seize the opportunity to really partner with other people around your institution that will contribute to your annual giving strategy. There's a lot of opportunity and benefit to this work. And while it changed in the U.S. News and World Report, and I think that's a good thing, it doesn't mean that this as a metric is completely going away or this as an important piece of the work is going away.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. It's a time for reflection. It's a time to reflect on what was the good and the bad and the ugly of elevating this metric so much. What expected and unexpected behavior did we get in return? And how do we want to be intentional about building and maintaining our relationships with our donors and our constituents in the future? This is fundamental to how we connect with people and how we exist as an actual community of real people. So do a deep dive on it. Ask the hard questions. Get philosophical. It's not just a numbers game. You know, what was the wonderful way you whack the denominator? What did you call it, Shalonda?
Managing the denominator.
Like whacking.
Like whack-a-mole. That's what I meant, you know? Yeah, like let's get deep about it and create a really livable fundraising future for ourselves.
So many fantastic quotes today, but let's keep that one. So no more managing the denominator today, please, please, please. Thanks, Shalonda. Thanks, Perry. It's been absolutely fantastic to share this time with you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Everybody.